Hare Krishna. Yeah, so like I was there in San Luis Potosí, and we arrived to this house where they had an altar, and they had like a kirtan in front of an altar with the flowers and kind of like religious images, deities, like Mexican deities, obviously Jesus, the Virgin. So it was the first time that I had seen like so much devotion. It was amazing. It was amazing, and it was really like, if it wasn't for this dream that I had, I wouldn't have known how to deal with it, because it was very, very intense, and we did that. But that was a trip we did then in San Luis Potosí. But then going back to Playa del Carmen, where I was with, so I was saying that this man, Ricardo Pareche, was very influential in my life, and I was very interesting to hear about that, everything he told me about India, his stories from India. And I remember at the time he was reading the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahamsa Yogananda, so I started reading that book as well. I was already inclined into reading all these things, and had brought so many books with me from Richmond, Virginia, also like Philosophy of Religion. So I was very inclined into reading all that, Also in Siddha Yoga, we also had many books that I used to buy, and I started to like do this Siddha Yoga practice very, 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 very intensely, and very disciplined. I used to do that Siddha Yoga practice very disciplined. I also used to do the Guru Gita. There was a chant, it's a chapter from the Skanda Purana. It's a conversation between Lord Shiva and Parvati about the importance of the spiritual master. So it's a prayer that lasts over an hour. So we used to do that every Sunday in the Siddha Yoga centers, and then when I was on my own, I started doing it every day. So that was in the summer of 2001 when I went to Playa del Carmen, and then in September I started working for an educational institution in a magic village here in Jalisco called Tapalpa, which is a beautiful town in the forest mountains. And I started working as a teacher assistant for this special education kids school called SITAC, which is a beautiful project because there was a lot of like artwork done in handcrafts, doing with recycled materials, in order to involve the kids doing these workshops, and also they had some workshops with adults. So it was very beautiful experience there, and I was just living on my own in a little house there in the town of Tapalpa, and just working for this organization, coming back on weekends to my parents' house every weekend, and still kind of like living a material life, maybe going to concerts here and there. I was already trying to give up drugs and drinking. I was trying to, purify myself and just like devote myself to my devotional practice and my meditation from the Siddha Yoga mantras and stuff. So I was very, very much into that, and at the same time I was doing my paperwork in order to study a master's degree. I had already found a school I was actually, during that time I was searching for schools because I wanted to do a master's degree in some ecological or environmental subject, and I wanted to go to France. That was my main goal, was to go to France. I always wanted to go to France because since childhood I had been learning French, and I was educated with French culture, but I didn't find any good school in France. So then I started searching for schools in the UK, because English also was the language that I could speak. So I started looking for schools in different universities in the UK, University of Reading, I don't know, Southampton, can't remember which ones, but the best program that I saw was in Scotland, in a university called the Centre for Human Ecology, and I learned about it from some magazines called The Ecologist that I used to get from Eva Kras, the mother of my friend Simon. She used to give me this magazine, so they had some advertising there for this Center for Human Ecology, and they had a very, very nice program. So I thought I'm going to apply there. So I was applying for going to Scotland, and I was working, with my paperwork and really, really endeavoring to go to Scotland when I was approved, when the next semester was going to be open. So during that time I was working in this town of Tapalpa, and I was just fixed on that. But then in the month of May 2002, I met this girl who was living there also in Tapalpa, and she was so beautiful. I fell in love with her. We obviously first get to know her, became friends, and then we started going out together, and it was such a beautiful experience because she was very religiously inclined. She was very religiously inclined, and we used to, and she taught me so much about religion. She actually like intensified my desire to search for God. We had a little notebook, and we used to write down our experience, kind of like a little diary. It was like a little orange notebook, and we wrote like poetry and diary. It was very beautiful. I had a very beautiful experience with her. She taught me how to pray before having lunch, before eating. You know, it was a very beautiful prayer. It was go along the lines of, "Please, Lord, help me to develop hunger for you." It was kind of along those lines, you know, like not just the physical food that we're gonna eat, but let me increase my desire for you. Let me increase my desire for you. Let me love you, let me serve you. It was kind of along those lines, and it was a very beautiful experience that I had with her for a few months, because I had already planned to go to Scotland. In fact, I couldn't give up that. I couldn't give up that because I really wanted to go, and it was also very painful at the end because I had to say goodbye to her. And at the time, before going to Scotland, my friend Simon came from Canada with her wife-to-be Kirsten, and the four of us took a trip also, you know, to visit some beaches and some places, and it was very beautiful time. It was very beautiful things we shared. But anyway, it was very painful. I remember at the time it was very painful because I had to leave my girlfriend, but at the same time I wanted to go to Scotland. And in the back of my mind, deep in my heart, I knew somehow or other that I was going to find my spiritual family. I don't know why, you know, even back then I knew that I was going to find something special. I don't know, it was Krishna's mercy, you know, that he was revealing to me little by little. So then anyway, after the painful goodbye and everything, I had to leave. I went to Scotland in the summer of 2002, and I arrived there in Edinburgh. And I stayed at a friend's house because my brother had a friend. At the time, my brother had a girlfriend called Catherine, German girl, and Catherine had another friend called Connie. So they had come to Mexico to visit, and Connie had been in Edinburgh studying chemistry or something, and she had stayed at a flat in Brunsfield Links in Edinburgh. So she gave me the contact, and when I arrived in Edinburgh, I stayed in the flat there with the boys. You know, I had some roommates there. They allowed me to stay for a couple of weeks until I find somewhere else to move. So after that, I found a host family, Indian host family, that were just behind the Centre for Human Ecology across from the Meadows in Edinburgh. So I moved to this Indian house family, and it was amazing. It was an amazing experience because it was like, by the time I had started to develop the desire for going to India, so it was like I was living in an ashram in this house, because it was a huge house in Hatton Place in Edinburgh, 13 Hatton Place, I think is the address. It was a huge house with many rooms that they rented for students. So I had my own room, and I set up my altar. At the time, I remember, and I was doing my meditational practice, you know, while I was enrolling in the Center for Human Ecology, and at the time I was not even listening to much music. At the most, I was listening to Susi 4, which is an electronic music band from Guadalajara, which was fantastic, and I wanted to promote as well. But other than that, I was just listening to bhajans. There were some Indian bhajans from some CDs from Siddha Yoga, and I was listening to Kula Shaker, especially these two songs, Govinda and Chintya Veda Veda Tattva. I didn't know anything about Krishna consciousness then, you know, but that was the only music that I was listening, and I was chanting my mantras in Om Namah Shivaya and these things. And so I was there, like I said, that was maybe possibly September, October, living with this Indian family. It was a fantastic experience. It was like living in an ashram with them, you know, because the man was called Saroj. The lady was called Saroj Lal, and her husband is Amrit Lal. Amrit and Saroj. And they both became like my parents. They both became like my parents. I adopted them. Like they were kind of like if it was like Baba Muktananda and the lady was like also like Guru Mayur sort of, you know. I just became very fond of them and living with them as in an Indian environment with them. Although they didn't give me his food, you know, I had a different meal planned with them. But anyway, it was very nice to meet them. And I remember going to the Center for Human Ecology even before classes began in September. I remember going into the cafeteria there at the Center for Human Ecology, and I saw the book The Higher Taste. The Higher Taste, and it wasn't actually my first Prabhupada book, I have to say, because I mean, going back in time, before when I was living in Tapalpa, I was already reading one book, and going back again a little bit further back, I was visiting Mexico City, because at the time when I was doing my paperwork to go to Scotland, I had to get some certificates on English, you know, like the TOEFL and the ISTL English tests and stuff. So I had to go to Mexico City for that. And I stayed at my aunt's house, which was another one of my mother's sister, and she was very religiously inclined and very culturally inclined. So when I was at her house, it was actually 9/11. I remember clearly. That was the day that 9/11 happened in New York. And at the time, like I also had visited the Siddha Yoga's meditation center in Mexico City, and before I left, the time I spent with her, she had given me a couple of books. I asked her through her little library. I asked her if I could take with me a couple of little books, and these books were Easy Journey to Other Planets, and it was also Ramayana. So I was reading these little books when I was going back and forth from Tapalpa to Guadalajara. So I had already read Easy Journey to Other Planets. And I have to mention as well, one other thing that I forgot to mention, it was then that when I was in Iteso, I had made friendship with the head director of the university, called David Fernández Dávalos. He was Jesuit priest, and somehow or other I made a friendship with him, and we used to exchange a lot. I remember we used to exchange a lot, talking about God, talking about spirituality. And when I came back from Richmond, I remember sharing with him these books, Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, but he didn't really agree. But anyway, out of the conversations we had, he wrote a book as well, and he printed it. It's called 12 Letters About God, and I was very honored, you know, because it was a book that it was inspired in our conversation. So like the letters are addressed to me, but also it was representative of the conversations he had with other people. So anyway, he was a good friend, David Fernández Dávalos, and then going back to Scotland, like I said, when I arrived into the Center for Human Ecology, I saw this other Prabhupada book, which was A Higher Taste. And that's when I started to really considering becoming vegetarian, you know, because I read through the book and really it was good for the environment, it was good for me, so many reasons. So anyway, I was staying with this Indian family. Then in around October, November, they invited me to Diwali, which I already heard about this festival from Siddha Yoga. It was the Festival of Lights. I didn't know much about it, but they invited me to Diwali festival. So I went to Diwali festival at the local Indian mandir there in Edinburgh, and it was a fascinating experience. It was a fascinating experience to see the altar with so many deities. It was just like, it was obviously like the Indian hodgepodge, you know. There were pictures of different gurus and Lord Ram and Lord Shiva and Lord Krishna, and everyone was there, you know. But it was so fascinating. I didn't know anything. It was the first time that I'd been to kind of like an Indian temple, and it was a large church as well. It's a large church, so it was a fantastic experience. And most importantly, for the first time, I saw Bhagavad Gita as it is by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So he was there lying on a cushion, and I thought, wow, this is amazing, Bhagavad Gita as it is, so I have to get this book. So I wanted to get a hold of the book, so I started searching in Edinburgh. After that Diwali festival, I went to near Lothian Road in Princess Street. There was some little library where they had like some esoteric books, and I asked if I could get a hold of the Bhagavad Gita, and the girl in the counter said, well, we don't sell it, but there's a program next door in the Peace and Justice Center. They have it every Wednesday night, so the Hare Krishnas might give you one if you want. So I thought, wow, fantastic. So the next Wednesday, I went there to the Peace and Justice Center at 6:30, and who do I meet? The first person I meet was this thin, tall, blonde man, shining with a big smile, and he's Javadvasi Prabhu. He was the first devotee I met there, and I was just completely amazed to see him, and I told him, what's your name? Javad. He said, what does that mean? Oh, it's a town, it's a small village in India. And anyway, I went into the Peace and Justice Center, and there was a Namahata going there every Wednesday that I attended every Wednesday for the rest of that 2002. And it was fascinating. It was just fascinating. I remember going there every Wednesday. I made friendships with Rory, who later became Ram Prasad, and Hugh, and I was just fascinated with the Prasad, with the halava. Little by little, I became addicted to halava, and just loved the Prasadam there. And the philosophical discussions, I was still like, most of the times Javadvasi Prabhu used to give the class there on the Namahata, and my questions used to be like challenging. I was always trying to find a question that he could not answer. I still had this challenging mood, but I was surprised. I was amazed, because at the time, like, Javadvasi Prabhu represented like the best of all the influential people that I had met in my life. Like all these people that I've been mentioning. I had been to psychoanalysis as well with Rosy Veloz, and she had helped me so much. But especially like my friends Alvar and Simon, like Javad represented like the best of them all, the best of all the people that I had met. The way he presented the philosophy, he was just so undefeatable. So little by little I started to accept. And one thing that it was very mystical as well at the time, one night I had a dream. I had a dream with a perfect book. Once I was living with this Indian family, I had a dream about a perfect book. And that night when I went into the Namahata, I found this one, The Hidden Glory of India, and I was surprised. I was just so amazed. I thought, wow, this is amazing. The book that I had just dreamt, a few hours ago. So I bought it and I read it, and I was even more amazed because in this book they talk about the Alvars. The Alvars, which are actually like a group of Vaishnavas from south of India who are like very devoted to God, and not just the whole book is just fantastic. This whole book is fantastic, and I just became even more in love with it. So gradually, little by little, started chanting. Then in December of 2002, I spent 1 week in London, going to the Soho Temple every day. It was just amazing because when I first arrived into the temple room in Soho Street, I was just in ecstasy, crying when I saw Radha Londonishwara. I was reminded of the experience I had in San Luis Potosí, where I'd seen these people doing the kirtan in front of the deities in so much like bhakti and devotion. It was amazing, that experience in London. I remember also seeing a boy with a Sanskrit tattoo in his arm, so I thought, wow, that's amazing, just like the tattoo I wanted to get for myself, But anyway, that was 1 week in London. I spent another week in France. I went to France. I wanted to get permission from the temple president, and he wasn't there, so I spoke over on the phone with Nitai Gaurasundar Prabhu. The temple was in Noisy-le-Grand at the time, so I spent 1 week in Paris, and it was a fantastic experience as well, doing Sankirtan. I spent most of the time like in the kitchen, just getting purified, washing pots, and maybe 1 or 2 days in Paris. With city center, we went to Tour Eiffel to some Sankirtan with some Chitatmana, one Brazilian devotee. So it was amazing, after that solidified my experience. When I came back to Scotland in January, I thought, wow, this is amazing, and it was in Nityananda Trayodasi that I first visited Karuna Bhavan, and that was amazing. That was an amazing experience to see Karuna Bhavan, Sri Shikodanita Mayapur Shashi, and meeting the devotees, the prasadam. It was an abhishek done. It was just so opulent. It was so opulent. Especially they were doing an abhishek to the Shaligram Shilas, and it was funny because I asked the guru there during the lecture, what would happen if I would steal one Shaligram Shila? And so his answers are, well, we're gonna beat you black and blue if you try to do that.